sure my audio is off. That's beautiful. Hold on. There you go. Okay, so some things to consider while you're thinking about not only what the interface looks like, but how it would operate. One of the things we will have in this is an element of 3D. And in After Effects, it's not actually 3D, it's 2.5D. But if you look, when the hologram comes out, this basically looks just like a flat layer, a flat composition. But then when he puts his hand down like this, it actually goes into that 2.5D mode where it looks like it's kind of 3D. And then obviously he's able to move stuff around. And then here, we're getting more of that where we're dealing with different levels of interactivity. This doesn't feel anymore just like a flat image. It feels like it has some depth to it. You'll find that these techniques are that basically that level of After Effects that takes you from being a beginner to being more of a professional. Just like being able to do some basic expressions, those will take you into that next level of being an animator inside of After Effects. Now, even though you will not have a character per se in the background of yours, doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about how it would interact. Like if someone was using it, what would they be doing, okay? So just keep those things in mind. Also look at all the different things that are moving. Firstly, as it comes onto the screen, you can see how it doesn't just like pop onto the screen. Again, we're looking at transitions of how we get stuff on there. It's transitioning onto the screen. And then as he's like, you know, doing his own thing, if you watch over here, you'll actually see like these little boxes kind of animating onto the screen. You'll also see this little ruler on the top and the bottom going back and forth. You'll also see the little levels down here kind of moving up and down too. And then if we watch the circles here, you'll see the circles are also kind of like randomly moving back and forth. Okay. It is like a DJ. That's the idea, is supposed to be something like that. He'd be able to like lift things up and then pull things out, whatever. That was the idea. I'm going to go through the initial part of this, but I also want to go through just the some other stuff that we'll get into. Okay, so just so you can see what the end product of that looks like, just like I did on my title card, just like I did on my transitions, I typically end with one composition that has everything kind of flattened out, and I do my final fixes here. So I do have like, oops, I turned both off. I do have a vignette that's on there that kind of helps sink it in. And then in here I have some other stuff that I've done. This one was where I'm bringing my hologram in with my robot. And then this one is the actual, like, all the layers that would go into that hologram. Remember, from Illustrator, every single one of my items I want to be able to move separately is on a separate layer. So I need to make sure that those things are set up accordingly. I also have some compositions inside here. I think that's just the only one, which is right there. And again, this is just random stuff just kind of moving around. Okay. And then this is just more stuff just kind of set up. All right, so I'm going to go into a new project. Oops, come on. Don't save. I'm going to jump over to my Illustrator file. This is my Illustrator file all set up. All my stuff is labeled correctly. I may not know what every single thing does, but at least I have it labeled so that when I get into After Effects, it's going to make more sense. It's going to make my life just a lot easier. So I save this. A couple things to note when you do save your stuff. I like to put in here ready to import. That way it makes it easier. Oops, make sure number 2. There we go. Or 32. We want to make sure that it's set to create PDF compatible file. Not that it is going to get turned off by default, but sometimes it does and it won't bring into After Effects. Also, if this is a CMYK image, it may not bring into After Effects. So if for some reason yours isn't coming in, Typically check those two things. Make sure it's RGB, make sure you have PDF compatible. Usually when people have an issue, those are the two things. As we go back and forth, we can change things on layers, but when we start adding new layers into the mix, that's where we will get a disconnect, where it'll start failing. Sometimes I'll create different elements in different files and bring those in separately and just place them where I need them. It's a lot simpler. So in After Effects, I'm going to go and import. So I'm going to go and find my stuff here. It's on fall, it's 1900, it's hologram, artwork, nice and organized folders here. And UI ready to import number 32. And then if I just choose footage, we'll get what we've gotten before, which is a flattened out version of this, okay? I don't want a flattened out version, I want all the layers there. If I go to this top one, which is composition retain layer sizes, if I have a small item, it'll remember that it's a small item, and it'll keep the layer size that small. If I go to composition, everything is the same size. So whether I have a tiny item or a big item, everything is like the same size of it. So I'm going to bring it in the wrong way first, so you can see why we don't want it, and then I'll bring it in the correct way. So I'm going to go to composition. We don't want this one. I'm going to hit import. We're going to get a layers group, and then we're going to get a composition. I'm going to double click the composition. If I click on one of these items here, you'll see how the bounding box fills the entire screen. If I move it, you can see that this is actually only a small item. Let me change my background color so we can see this better. There we go. All right, so this little green central black part is right there. And if I go to the next layer, you'll see that this one is also right there. Now that's kind of sucky, because if I wanted to click specifically on this one item, I can't do that, because basically all these like bounding boxes are on top of each other. I can't select individual pieces without going down here. Also, if I find where those are at, top circle. Well, that's way over there. Full circle notches. That's that one. Top left. Top right. Top left corner. That's that. I gotta go really far down. There it is. Circle dials. Okay. So this one here, if I go to my rotate, notice that the pivot is way over here, and as I rotate this around, it's going to rotate like that. Again, something that is not desirable in this type of situation, which is why we don't want this to be like that. Cool. I'm going to go back to Illustrator for a second. I did just realize that I have the wrong size, so I'm going to reset this to the correct artboard size. Remember, this should be double 1280 by 720. So we don't want 1280 here. I want this to be 2560 by 1440. And the reason for that is so that we have a lot more room to kind of work with. So I'm going to make that bigger by scaling up everything and fitting it. Perfect. And now I will save. Jump back in here and then bring that in. Okay, this is the one we want, composition retain layer sizes. I will hit import. Okay, so now I double click that comp, now everything is set up right, everything is good. Cool, so there's all my stuff. I'm going to change the background color. Usually if I've drew in black inside of Illustrator, then the things in here are going to be very difficult to see. So there's all my stuff. Now what I want to do is make sure, obviously, that everything is there. If something isn't there, I want to correct it. If my layers didn't show up correctly, I want to fix that too. You want to do all your housekeeping stuff ahead of time to make sure, because once you get committed to this animation, you don't want to have to jump back and redo stuff. Okay? So if there's anything wrong, I may just delete this, re-import it again, whatever I need to do. All right, so once I have that set up, then I'm going to go through and try to lay out all my elements that are maybe background elements that don't really have a lot of movement going on. The circles in that animation, they are 3D. When I click and drag them, they all move in this 3D fashion. I need those to be separate as like their own thing. I can't group those together. But things like this over here, all of these little bars and things like this, these aren't going to be 3D. They're basically just going to be like the ground plane for that hologram. So all of these items I can bring in as a separate piece. So if if I forget which layers they are, I can always go back to Illustrator and grab them and see that this is the angle right bar. This is basically these layers here. And these layers here that I forgot to name apparently, 139 and 140. Yep. Okay. So angle right bar all the way down to circle dials. So I'm going to go in here, find angle right bar all the way down to circle dials, and then layer 139 and 140. Okay. So I'm going to take all of those. I'm going to Control-Shift-C this, and then I'm going to put this into a separate composition that's going to be just called background elements, ground elements, something. Okay, now that shouldn't change anything visually that we're seeing. Everything should just be exactly as we saw it there. Okay, if I turn it off, I can see exactly what I've just put onto that composition. If there's other elements that I also want to put there, I'll put those there too. Some of these things I've broken down pretty small. So like this element here has been broken down into little pieces. So if I wanted to go into this area, oops, I should fix that too. I have this curve right there. Let's fix that. Let's grab this. Let's grab our pen. Just nudge that down. There we go. Do the same thing on this side. And those kinds of changes are no big deal. I just resave this. And then After Effects will update. And I'll do the same thing on this side. Okay. So this element here is a separate item, so that's just a separate layer or a separate item. This is a separate item. This is a separate item. So just like I moved those circles and kind of expanded them, I could do the same thing with each one of these. I'm not going to, might be a bit of overkill. So I'm just going to keep these as all together. So I'm going to marquee all of these pieces. And I'm going to marquee all of these pieces. And I'm going to marquee all of these. And marquee all of these. Now with the, I don't know what I grabbed there. With the retain layer size, I can do that. If I didn't have that retain layer size and everything was that same bounding box, it wouldn't let me do this. Yes, sir?
Is there ever a time to use that like general composition one? It doesn't seem like there would.
Right. I've never had an instance where I needed it. Usually everyone retains the layer size. So I don't know. just to screw with us, I think is why they put it there. Yeah, like Adobe. So now I need to take these layers and put them into the other comp. I don't want to do another pre-comp. I just want to Control-X to cut these. I'll grab that other one. Double-click my background elements, Control-V to paste it, and now they're in that same comp. Okay? So what I'm doing is just kind of bunching stuff together that makes sense together. Okay, there. So everything is inside of this comp now. And then I go into here. And then I'm going to have the center ring to this. I believe I'll go over there. Yep. So this is all one ring right here. And then this is all another ring. And then I have these other corners. These they actually be cut and put into this one too. Okay? So this is basically going to be in my final version. This will be the flattened out stuff. This is the ground plane, basically that my hologram would kind of like rest on. And then the other elements are things that will actually pop out and be more of a 3D aspect. Okay, now I don't want to group these into their own thing because I need them to stay separate. Okay, so my next step now is to focus on connecting things together and getting things to animate. So I'm going to do some very simple ones first, and then I'll go into more complex ones. So this circle right here, if I go to its rotate and I look at it, you'll see that the pivot is perfect. It's already centered because it was a circle inside of Illustrator. It comes in as a circle and the pivot's in the right spot. If it wasn't, I would have to move the pivot. So I should look at how I want to animate this thing. Do I want to animate it like this? Do I want this just to slowly rotate? or do I want it just to sit there? Everything doesn't have to move, but we do want to have a lot of things moving, okay? So I'm going to save this for a second, and this is going to go into hologram. Nope, it's going to go into this hologram. Generate hologram, scene. Sorry, go now. And I'm going to jump over to another project folder or project file I have here, which is just different examples of ways to animate stuff. Like we mentioned before, we always want to find different ways that we can move things a lot quicker. So like we did an animation on one of our pieces of text, the little blinking cursor, and then we made that looping expression that looped it over and over and over again. So there's other ones that we'll play with as well. So here are some different examples of different ways that we can automate animation. So this little blip happening on the right, that is an automatic thing. Okay, I was able to set a couple keyframes and then loop those things. These things over here are done using expressions. There's no keyframes on any of these here, they're just expressions. So let's look at how we can do some of those. So first, let's look at the setup of these bars. So I'm going to go into one of these bars here. And this is a bar that I rebuilt inside of After Effects. Some of your elements you may want to build inside of After Effects just for editability's sake. That's on you as to how you want to do that. So I built this bar. I made a fill line. This is the thing that would actually like fill up, and this is the thing that would animate. Then I have some lines right there. Then I have an outline. And then I have what's called a null. And the null is basically a way for me to just grab the entire thing and move it around. Okay, I've shown these before. Basically, I created under layer new null right there. And then I took all these elements and I parented them to the null. That way, as I grab the null and move it, it's not going to screw things up. And if I needed to scale everything down, I can scale everything down without, again, screwing everything up. Okay? Now I need to look at how I want to animate this. So I'm going to look at this right there. Okay. Look at how not round this is. This is somewhat round right there. Now if I go to where this is at the top of this, right, you're so close, just right there. There we go. As I get in here, you can see this is much more round. Okay. So the way that this specific one is animated is I'm just scaling up that background layer. That's all it's doing, is just scaling the Y direction of it. Let me jump to this other one real quick, which is that one. And this one is perfectly round right here. And as it gets higher up, it stays the same roundness. This one is using position. So I'm actually moving the position of this thing up and down. Okay? So how you animate things will depend. If this was a straight line, there's no issue in scaling. As it's rounded, I think scaling kind of like loses the shape of it. Sir?
When we draw lines in our Illustrator files, do they still appear as lines?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be able to do a line path and things like that?
You wouldn't be able to have it draw that out. We would have to go a couple extra steps. I can show that too, but yes, it can do that. Okay, so how this is animated is using an expression. That's all it's doing. I'm going to jump to back to this composition and just hide everything for a second. Actually, I have it already set up. Where's my radar? Right there. Radar. That's that. Rotate. There we go. So this thing here rotates forever. You can see that it just goes around and around and around. Okay, now I could have set keyframes on it. I could have put a keyframe here, gone to the end, set another keyframe, having it spin. But again, we always want to think about the smart way to do these kinds of things. So what I did was I wrote an expression for the rotation of it. Okay, so here's what it is by default. There's no movement. If I alt-click on that rotation stopwatch, I can type in a value here, and that value will be what the expression is. So just so you can see, if I were to type in 500, It basically is just going to set the rotation value to 500. There's no animation, it's just 500. I want to link this to something that is constantly moving, constantly updating. So let me go to my WordPad so you can see this better. So expressions. So one of the things that is constantly updating when we hit the play button is time. As we hit play, time is always moving. We're always advancing. Okay. So in After Effects, I can actually use that as a trigger for how to drive something. So if I were just to say that the rotation equals time, okay, so I'm going to Alt-click, just type in the word time here, and then hit play, we'll see that the rotation is linked to the time. Okay, now why is it not moving very much? It is moving. Let me jump back here.
Oh, I didn't even recognize that.
Right. So why isn't it moving very much? Speed up the time, right? So when we're at 10, what is the rotation degrees? 10. 10, yeah. It's equal to time. So when we're at 10 seconds, the rotation is 10, okay? So if I want this to go faster, what should I do to the time? Do what to it? Times 360, there we go. Right. So now we hit play, and now it's going faster, right? So you will find that multiplying it is typically going to be your way to make things go faster. Okay, regardless of what it is, multiplying will typically make it go faster. If that's too fast, what do I do? Yeah, make it less. There's no... when I talk about expressions and people get worried about them, it's literally just like common sense stuff. Like the big number, make it smaller, and then it goes slower, right? And that's too slow. I think I had it at like 150, I think, maybe. I don't know what it was. Or 90. Yeah, that's too fast. But you can see how easy this is compared to me putting keyframes, testing it out, then adding more keyframes and tweaking it and whatever. I just change one number and it works. All right, so that's good enough for that. All right, so our expression for that was time times 90. And just as an example, when time is 10 seconds, rotation will be 900. Okay. So what if I did this time times 0.25? What would it do then? It would slow it down, right? So in this case, when the time is, I'm going to use easier numbers. When the time is 10 seconds, rotation will be what? 2.5. Okay? So something to consider. Some people will divide stuff. Some people will multiply. I typically like to multiply it by a decimal, because this essentially is the same thing. Okay, so if I did this one here or this one here, those two are the exact same thing. Visually, it's all up to what you want to do. Okay. All right. How many different numbers do we typically use for rotation? One. One. That's all we need. Degrees. How many degrees around is this thing going? Okay. When we get into stuff like position, we need two dimensions. We have X and Y. So I'm going to use the same concept on my other stuff here. So I'm going to go into my wiggle, and I'm going to just delete that. Okay. So I need this to change its position. There it is. To move this randomly up and down. Okay. Now we can apply the same concepts to what we just did. The only difference, though, is that we have two numbers here, not just one. Okay? Yes, sir. We will use wiggle eventually, but I'm going to show another way to do it first. Okay? So I'm going to Alt-click this, And if I were just to type in time here, let's say like we did the other one, I'm going to get an error. So the yellow bar means that there's an error, you've typed something wrong. If you click the triangle, it'll tell you why. Usually, and I do this all the time, it'll say it must be of dimension 2, not 1, meaning that it doesn't know which value I want for this time to be. Do I want it to be the x direction? Do I want it to be the y direction? What is it that I'm trying to connect these two? So what we're going to do is we're going to get into what are called variables. Okay, a variable is basically just a storage container for values. Okay, so in order for us to assign something to position, we need a x position and we need a y position. Type right, there you go. Okay, so when we do a variable inside of After Effects, every programming language has its own quirks about what it needs. Every variable needs to have a $sign at the beginning of it, so we'll do $sign, and then we have to give it a name. The name can be pretty much anything. We're going to call it exactly what it is, x position, and then y position. Okay, now these haven't been defined. These don't have any values right now, so I need to assign them values. So I'm going to say x position, capitalization matters, so if I capitalize this one, the other one needs to be capitalized too. If I lowercase one, I lowercase the other. So x position for this one will equal -1. That's what it's currently at. I put a semicolon at the end to let After Effects know that the line is done. And then y position can equal time. So what I've done here is I've said the x position will equal -1. That's what it was already at. The y position will equal time. And then this actually says, now use these two values for x and y. We call them x, we called it y. After Effects doesn't know that that's what we're trying to do. I could have swapped these. I could have called this hamburger and this one hot dog. After Effects has no idea, okay? So semicolons at the end, copy this, paste that there, and now we rewind this and we hit play. Okay, so it definitely is updating. There it goes. And just like before, it's moving, right? It's doing something. It's just going very slow. So just like before, we'll take that time and we will multiply it times, let's say, oops, my numlock was off, 20. And it's a good idea to copy and paste your stuff out here. There we go. Time times 20. Forgot my semicolon at the end. There we go. Because you may need those expressions later. You may realize that, hey, I want to use this, or I want to make sure I have a catalog of these. Okay, so now this is working. It's actually doing what it should be doing. It's just moving slowly downward. Time is something that will gradually update. So at 10 seconds, it's going to be, in this case, 20. And at 20 seconds, it'll be 40. So it's gradually going to go down. Something like this, I may not want that to happen. I may want it to do more of a random kind of movement. I may want to kind of jump around some. Okay, so time is one that will constantly move. Another one is called wiggle. And we mentioned this before with our other stuff. But wiggle is another expression that will give us a random number, and it'll transition from this random number to that random number. So it needs a couple different arguments. One of them is, how often do you want a new random number? How many times per second do you want a random number? So if I type in 5 here, what is that going to indicate to After Effects?
5 times you want a random number.
Per second, right? So that means that in 1 second, I'm going to get 5 random numbers. Then I put a comma, and then I tell it how big of a difference I want this to be. Like how random do you want this number? So as a, for instance, I'll put 100 here. Okay? So now what it should do is it should give me a random number 5 times a second with a variety of 100 different, a range of 100 different numbers. Okay? So I'm going to copy that. I will paste it. I will get an error because I typed something wrong. Nope, I always forget this. This wiggle will actually give us back several different numbers, okay? It's like 2 different numbers that it gives us. I need to grab just the first number of this wiggle. So this may be a little bit confusing at first, but you'll get it. So I'm going to make this y position equal to the y position, and I only want to grab the first number of that y position, okay? So this wiggle right here might give me the number 15 and the number 7. Those are the 2 numbers it gives me back. After Effects doesn't know which number I want to use. So this says just use the first number of that. 0 is always first when we're dealing with arrays, which is what this is. So I'll copy this again. I will paste that again. I will click off. I will get an error. Let's see what the error is this time. It's pointing to that line. Y position is not. Y position was wiggle. Yes, sir.
Aren't you supposed to put a space between the comma and the y in the parentheses?
Oh, no, I forgot the $sign.
And then you forgot the y.
And I also forgot
The p.
the P, because my insert button was hit, so it was overriding. This is the worst thing about expression or coding of any kind. There we go. All right. You do. All right. So now it's doing what it should be doing. It's giving us a random number 5 times a second, and it's giving us a range of about 100 different things. What's the issue with it, though? Obviously, the bottom, right? So we're getting this range, and it's going this way, and it's going that way. I want to basically just like move it down so it never hits that part where it goes above it, okay? So this is the easy part, because all I have to do, you would think subtract. Like I want to move it down, you would think subtract, it's add, okay? In After Effects, this is 0, 0, and then this is the width, so whatever the width of this composition is, and then this is the height, okay? So in this case, I'm going to add 100 to this. Copy that again. Overwrite it. Okay, now that slides that layer down, so here's where it is at the bottom. And now we should see it doing that. So now it's basically getting cut off. If I needed that to be bigger, I could make it huge and just let it slide in and out of that area there. Oops, it still kind of popped up. I'm going to make this maybe 200. And I'm going to change the amount of wiggle on this. This is, again, where those wiggles come in handy, because I can really just kind of focus on how fast I want something to go or how much movement I want to get inside of there. And it will just do it. Just type in a couple numbers, and then there it is. So now I have a very slow moving item here. Right? So that seems to work. Now, what's the lowest I can go per second here? 0, right? And then it'll give me how many random numbers per second?
No.
0, right? So if I still want to get some randomness, but didn't want it to go 0 times, you can go to like this, 0.005, okay? And basically, it'll go a new random number every 0.005 seconds. So it might take like 10 seconds before it gets a random number, so it'll go super slow. Some items you may want that to happen. If I had a gauge that's for like my airplane, like how steady is it, I don't want it like freaking out all over the place. I want it to kind of gradually move this way and then kind of gradually move that way. So you might get these really slow numbers, maybe even that. Okay. Even though it doesn't move a lot, nothing has to move a whole bunch. You're better off having a bunch of things that kind of gradually move and we can kind of see things moving over time versus everything is just going crazy and it's very difficult to see anything going on. Okay? So this is a good one for wiggle. It transitions from one point to the next point to the next point to the next point. There's another one here. I'm just going to copy this whole thing. And the other one is called random. And this one will give you a random number between 2 different numbers. So if I said I want a random number between 0 and 500, it will give me a random number between 0 and 500. The disadvantage of this is that that will give me a random number every single frame. Okay? Some things I may want that to happen. I may want something to just like jump up and down, and that is definitely something that in our world we may need. we shouldn't need this. Okay, this is only going to give me one number, so I don't need that extra array assignment. Let's copy that. The cool thing is too, with any of these, you can always, like this is my wiggle expression. I can copy this whole setup, rename this to be, or just leave it at wiggle 2. Oops, I don't know why I drug it in there. I don't want to drag it in there. I want to just copy it. There we go. And then if I just go to that position, paste it, now I'm going to get this. Again, a random number between 0 and 500. In this case, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but definitely you could use something like that, okay? Right. Did you have a question?
I was going to ask if that can be used for like actual text, because I thought I was going to do like an EKG, and that would work really well for like you're trying to keep the levels of the heart or something.
Right, you could do it.
It would work for that.
Well, here's the thing too, with any of the stuff I'm showing, there's no locked in rules, right? So you could push this to do whatever you want. It's just a matter of what is the best way to do it. So something like an EKG, I'd want to look at the system, see what they're doing there, and then try to emulate it. Sometimes you'll use a random, sometimes you use a wiggle. Sometimes you'll use, let me jump to this expression here. Sometimes you'll use different plugins too, which we'll get to more. I'm just going to, oh, it's under audio. Audio, nope, it's under generate. Audio spectrum, there we go. So this is audio spectrum. This might be something that you could actually use for something like that. I just need to get a piece of audio here. There we go. And drop it into the comp. And then I'm going to sync up my audio layer, which is right there. Okay, so now when I come back here, you can see there's the audio file being displayed. No, and that's one of the cool things too, is that you can come up here and you can control it, the frequency. There's the end frequency, so you can kind of move it around. Right now it's digital, so I can do analog lines. You can change the thickness, you can adjust, you know, different properties. There's a height in here somewhere, there it is. Right, so if you were doing like a heart, right, you can have that heartbeat go in there, and you can do something like this, whatever. Yep. And there's other plugins too that we can get into for doing some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, anything that we do, just try to think of what are the properties doing? What is the scale doing? What is the position doing? Any of that. This little radar thing here, just to show that real quick. This one. So I did 3 things that I animated. I animated the stroke, the scale, and the opacity of this little circle. That's all it is, a circle that goes like that. Now I sync them all up so that the start and end of each one is exactly the same, and then I looped each one so that they all loop in the exact same way. If any one of these was off, the whole thing would be off. So I just moved those keyframes, right? So it doesn't make sense, right? Because one's looping, or the 2 are looping first, and the other one's looping like after. Also, I found that the scale, having this as an easy ease seemed to work good, but having the stroke and having the opacity at easy ease didn't work good. So I did not easy ease those. The point is that I'm getting the idea across about what this is supposed to be doing. That's what I'm pushing for. Okay. Expressions. All right, so I got my wiggle, I got that one, okay. So as you look at these values here, jump back to this, jump back to this. This one was done using position, but I could do it on rotation. I could write expressions on scale. I could write expressions on Position, rotate, or scale. The other one is opacity. We just have to consider what it's looking for, okay? Rotation, you could literally have any number at all. So it could be 5 trillion, it could be 6. Position, same thing. You could have any numbers. Scale could be any number. Opacity is a percentage, 0 to 100. That's the only range that it works in. So if I went here and I built a box, there we go. And then I went to opacity, there we go. And I alt-clicked on this and I wrote an expression. Let's say that I'm going to use wiggle. I'm going to say 3, comma 50 or 40, that works. And then I click off of it. You'll note that because this is, remember I said wiggle will give you 2 different numbers? If I'm just using wiggle and nothing else, it doesn't need me to do any variables, it doesn't need me to do any reassignment. I can just type in the wiggle there and it automatically knows. It's only when I'm doing a variable here that I need to do this part, which is assign it just to that first number of it. All right, so now this is wiggling and it's kind of wiggling within that 40 range area. Let's set this to, I don't know, 230. Okay, we're not going to notice a huge difference because it's not going to go to 230. It's going to go from 0 to 100. That's its range. Okay, so you just have to be aware of that because sometimes you'll set it up thinking you're going to get these like extremes and you don't. And you'll see because I've set it up to such a big range, right now it's at 0, and then it's going 3, 6, and then 0, and then 11, 44, 69, 79, and it's jumping back down. So because I made such a huge range on this, we're getting these huge jumps. If I just set this to something like 60, or I'll just put it even at 100, we're getting a much softer kind of animation on top of it. Okay? So just be aware of that as well. And then literally anything can have expressions written onto it. You may have to do some workarounds. So for like this item here, I'm going to go to my fill, and you'll see that there is a color here that has the swatch. If I alt-click on this, you can write expressions for color. Do I want to write an expression for color? I don't know. Let's see. We'll just throw in wiggle here. It's not going to work. Or maybe it'll work. We'll find out. It did work. Look at that. Sometimes you'll go into color correction, you'll go into, let's say, hue and saturation, and this is the one I was going to show. You can, to each one of the items. Anything with a stopwatch you can do. So this is where, in this case, I can't do it, because right now it's set to channel range, which is this whole thing. So it's actually all 3 of these is what is being controlled with that channel range. But if I choose colorize, then I could go into, let's say, the saturation and just do an expression on just the saturation. And again, that's going to go from 0 to 100, so I could say wiggle 3 times 100. And now I have something that's going to fluctuate in just the saturation, or I could do it just to lightness, or I could do it just to hue. Now if I did it to hue, look at the kind of number that I'm getting here. What number does that look like? What kind of number? Where else have we seen something like that? What about that? See how we have the 0x plus 0, 0x plus 0? It's a rotation, right? So the hue is actually a circle, 360 degrees, but we can have that. Yeah, that's all it's doing. But obviously we need to know that, so when we write an expression, we know what we're trying to control, okay? Now, the other thing that we can do with expressions is we can actually link things together. So let's use, where's my radar at? So this rotation here, let's say that I wanted it to be linked to something else moving, okay? So I'm going to go and drop in a shape like this. These are not connected. This is just for an example. And I'm going to go to the opacity of this. Not the opacity. I'm going to go to the position of this. And I'm going to alt-click on the position here. Now, instead of me writing an expression, what I can do is I can drag this little pick whip, is what it's called, to something else. So I'm going to drag the pick whip to the scale right here. Okay, this is 2 numbers, this is 2 numbers. When I click off of this, it'll move. That's not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and add these 2 numbers back into it, and it'll put it roughly back in the same spot. But now those 2 things are connected, so that when I hit play, as the circle scales up, we'll see that bar shifting around. Okay, so as it's doing that scale and then looping back, it's those 2 things are connected. Now in this case, it doesn't really make much sense, but think about other areas you might get to where you're like, okay, as this thing moves across, I want this thing to brighten up. That's something that you could do. If I jump back here and I say, click off that. I'm going to go to the position. I'm going to put my pivot right there. And I'm just going to animate this straight away this way and then there. There we go. And then I'm going to open up its opacity and I'm going to link it. Now, opacity is a 1 digit. These are 2 digits. I can also drag this to either one of these. So I'm going to drag it to this 62. So now as we hit play and wait, it's stuck at 62 because I connected to the wrong one. Hold on. Now let's drag it to the other one. There we go. Okay, now it's getting bigger than that, so I need to reduce it. So I'm going to multiply this times 0.25. Actually, more than that, 0.125. There we go. So now as it slides across, it's getting brighter. And the cool thing about that is that I can still maintain that connection and move this wherever I want it. So as I move it this way, look, it's dimmer. As I move it this way, now it's brighter. Just based on that expression, I can have these 2 things being linked up so that it'll constantly do stuff like that. Cool. Now let's look at the 3D layers real quick. Where'd my 3D layers go? Threw them in here. There we go. All right. So this is a 3D layer. So this is something that is spinning around in 3D. And then, in a second, we'll actually see it expand. There it goes. Okay, so no longer are we dealing with just flat imagery. Now we're dealing with this 3D environment. Ooh, so fancy. Okay, pretty sweet, right? Yeah, that's awesome. All right, let's bring that in. Actually, let's just go to the other one and just look at it there. Hologram start. Okay, so the other stuff, that's for all the stuff that we would animate inside here. We look at each individual component. Some things we will redraw. Some things we'll animate right inside of this one. I'm going to jump over to here, and I'm going to set up one of these rings to be animatable in 3D. We simply don't want to go at this point especially and just start setting keyframes. We want to do a setup process, make sure everything is set up, make sure it works, and then we'll animate it. Okay, this part is called rigging. So first thing I'm going to do is just go through and isolate the elements here that I want. Oops. So I'm going to control click that. All right, so there's all my green stuff that I want right here. I'm going to right click on this. Where's my color? Wait, why are my colors showing up? Right click here. Properties, color. Hold on, one of my things is missing. we'll just ignore it. I'm going to use this other thing for now until I figure out why that's not there. This is Shy Guy. When you get a million layers, he helps. So you click on Shy Guy, and then you click on this Shy Guy, and then all those other layers just disappear. You can still see them, but we're not seeing them in here, so we can focus on just those items. I tried to change the color of these. I'm not sure what happened to my color swatches.
If you click Shy Guy again, it'll just pop back.
Yep, they just pop back. So definitely a time saver. So first thing I need to do is I need to make all my layers 3D. This little box here is 3D. So now they're 3D. Now I'm going to undo that for a second just by turning that off again. And I'm going to go to position, and right now we have two values, right? The X and Y. I'm also going to open up rotation. We have the number of times rotated, and we have the degrees. Once I click 3D on, notice how now our position has three values, X, Y, and Z. And then we have something called an orientation. And then we have X, Y, and Z rotations, okay? So now, once we click 3D, we get a lot more stuff going on. Everything that had 2 dimensions is now going to have 3 dimensions. Our scale will also have 3 dimensions, okay? So I'm not going to move anything yet. I just wanted to do that. Then I'm going to go and create a null. Anytime we have something that we want to control overall, like I want to be able to grab one thing and move all those pieces around, I'll create a null. I'm going to move the null to the center of this thing. Now to get it locked in perfectly, I'm going to hold Control, and that should let me lock it in right there. Okay, now I need to organize these. So that's an inner ring. I'm going to look for my very outer ring first. There it is. So this one's going to go on the bottom. And then that's a center one, so that can stay there. That's there. That one's there. That one's there. That one's there. And where is this one? Let's solo that right there. Okay. So that should be good there. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent these in a specific order. Looking at how this thing would move, I could do it a number of ways. This is the way that I'm going to do it. That outer ring is going to be the base. That's going to be locked in. Everything else will pull up from there, okay? So as I grab the base, which is right here, I'd want the thing above it to move with it. So I'm going to go and parent the outer mid-ring, whatever that is, to that green outer ring. Then I'm going to go to the next one and parent that one to that one. Go to the next one and parent that one to that one. Go to the next one. I'm just parenting it basically to the one above it. Did I do it wrong again? I did 8, 7. I did this last time too. 6, 5, 4, 3. And then my null is going to be by itself, but my green outer ring will be parented to the null. So I'm going to call this green outer. It might take a minute to wrap your minds around how this stuff works. Do it a couple times, you'll get it. Cool. So now I'm going to make the null also 3D. And now if I go to rotate the null is rotating the big circle is rotating the next one's rotating the next one, and so on down the list. So as I rotate this, you'll see how it now rotates in 3D. Now I'm going to also unshy that one thing and then just hide these two because I don't want to see those as I'm working. Oops. There we go. So now I rotate, and you can see how now it's rotating like it's in 3D. Rotate in the Y direction, that's good. Rotate in the Z direction, and we get this. So that works good. I'm going to do just a simple setup just to test it out and make sure it works. So I'm just going to set a Y keyframe here, scooch up a bit, set a Y keyframe there. Okay, so this is basically what I had on the other one. Let me change my background color to darker. There we go. Cool. Now I'm going to pull it out, okay? So each one of these things are connected to each other. So when I grab the bottom and I move it, it's going to move the other ones. When I grab that one and move it, it moves the other ones. When I grab that one and move it, it moves the other ones. if they weren't all connected this way, I would have to basically move each one individually as far as I want each one to move. I don't have to do that now. So I'm going to go here and grab all the pieces, go to their position, and you'll notice that our manipulator has changed. It's no longer just the 2 arrows. It's now red, green, and blue. You'll see this across all 3D applications. Red is always going to mean the X direction, green is always going to mean the Y, and blue will always mean the Z, okay? Z is the depth. That's our actual like 3D part of it. So I'm going to scooch up to like here. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to scooch up to there, and then I'm going to grab just the Z and drag it out. Okay, so now let's see if that looks, it should. So it spins around, and then there we go. Now it's paper thin, which is why it's called 2.5D.
Now, how does it know to separate them in the space that it does?
Because each one, imagine each one of these is at 0, okay? So the first one I moved was the bottom one. I moved that one 10. So what did that do to all the other ones? Move them 10, right?
Yeah.
So then I moved the next one 10. So the back one stays there,
I get you.
right? And so it does that to each one of those, and we get this kind of effect. Because they're parented this way, it works. If they weren't parented, I would have to go into each one and move them as far as I wanted them to move, okay? Now, let me undo that, because obviously it works, right? I could get into here and do an expression on just the Z, and I could say that the Z for each one of these is linked to the other one a certain percentage. I'm not going to do that here because it's a bit more than I want to get into, but we could. I could link the Z's position, so that way I only animate one of these, and the whole thing will either expand or contract. That's high-level stuff there, okay? So this works. We know that the 3D is working, so good. So I'm just going to delete the keyframes on this. And then I'm going to unshy. I'm going to take all of these and shy guy these and hide these. Then I'm going to grab the other pieces, unshy guy, unhide. And then I'm going to set these ones up too. So I'm just going to make sure that I have these in the right order. So there's my center ring, which is not really the center. There's notches, which should probably be further back. Center circle should probably be in the center. Center, yes. Dashes. And where's that other one at? Oh, there it is. Yep, that's way down here. Okay, so I'll do this part again so you can see it. Make another new solid, or a new null. And then parenting them the same way. So make sure that all 3D first. Make sure my null is centered. If I didn't move my null first, it would screw things up and I would have to move it anyway. So, and I also have to make sure it's not 3D, which is kind of weird. You have to make sure it's not 3D before you lock it.
How do you lock it all again?
Not lock it, but just snap it to the center. So I just hold Control and drag it, and it'll snap.
I thought that it just did it automatically.
Right, it doesn't. You have to hold Control. All right, so there we go. All right, so now I have this, and then I'm going to go to my outer circle, which is parented to the black outer null. The circle with spreader gets parented to the outer circle, and this one, and this one. If you have them in the right order, it's simply just parenting it to the one right above it. Oops, 12. And then this will be 11, and then I'll test it out again. If I move the null, we just go to the position. If I move the null, everything moves. If I rotate the null, everything rotates. And if I just do that and then go to their position and do that, everything moves. Cool. Okay. Then I can do some little expressions on these just to get them to kind of randomly move. So now I can bring in the rotation of this one, rotation of that one. Let's say I'm going to alt-click on the, oops, then the Y. I don't think I want to do the Y. No. I want to do the Z direction. Oops. Oh, and it's a little bit off. Look at that. That's no good. I can move the pivot, but I'm just going to try to see if I can find one that is already good. That one's already good, so I'm just going to use that. So I'm just going to say wiggle, 0.25, and I'll say 400. There we go. Now what I'll also do sometimes is just grab the rotation of something else. Make sure it rotates perfectly circular. Seems good. I'm going to alt-click that. And I'm going to put in a negative number. And so what it should happen is, because they're connected, like everything's moving this way, but then these other pieces are going to move the opposite. So you get kind of like this combination lock, like fitting thing. So now you see how I have things moving in both directions. So it could be something kind of neat. And again, this is kind of like stacking our animations, layering our animations, so that we have the 3D part that will spin around, we have this other part that will expand, and then we have all these other things kind of moving like that. Yeah, that's it, just the wiggle. Cool. All right, so now let me jump into my background elements, and I'll get started on some of these. First, I want to find my rulers and click on that. There it is, layer 140, bot ruler, and this is probably the top ruler. All right. So something like this is a good example of where we need to use expressions, or we need to use effects. This doesn't work. If I want to move this left and right, you'll see that it gets cut off on the left and right side. So I'm going to go under Effect. I'm going to go to Distort. Offset, there it is. And what this is going to do is if I move this left or right, you'll see how it like loops. So the way I drew this in Illustrator was I had it start and end were looking exactly the same. So now I'm going to write an expression for this so that it will loop left and right. So I'm going to Alt-click this. I want this to be a wiggle. Say 500. Okay. Now this isn't going to work, or it shouldn't work. Yeah, it is slow, but look at it, it's going up and down also, right? Because I've connected this wiggle to both numbers, not to just one number, right? So that's where I need to jump back to my expressions and say, okay, in this area, this is where we wrote an expression to control just one item. That's what it did. So this is going to be controlling just the X. So the X position in here, let me undo my expression. Okay, so the Y position will be 98, I believe is what I have there, 89. And then the X position will be my wiggle. And then this will be X, this will be X. I don't need this on here anymore. And then I can just copy that. Alt-click on that shift, paste that expression. Hopefully no errors, nope. And there we go. So now we have something that looks like, you know, it's kind of gauging where it should be at. I don't like how fast it's moving, so I'm going to change that number there. And then once I know that it works, I copy it, I go to my other one, add the same expressions. Yeah, that's what I did. I just copy pasted. Now, if I wanted those two to be synced up so that as one moves this way, they both move the same direction, that's where I could have used that pick whip to connect those two things together. Okay, that way they're both always in sync. This way, they're actually generating new random numbers for each one of them, so they're all moving independently. Okay, so what I would do at this point is I brought my stuff in. I've organized it, I've made sure my 3D works on those 3D layers. Now I can go through this and just start animating each one of these. So I would jump over to these bars and animate the bars how I want them to move. I would go over here to these circles, animate those how I want those to move. Some of these items may not have any animation on them. These black framing corners, there's no animation. They're just going to stay there. That's fine. This area here, I may want those to move around. I could, yeah. I can make them fill up anything, right? So these little bars here, I can make these fill up as well, right? So let's say that I wanted this to be blue. Okay, so I just make a solid. I put that there, and I'm going to use that layer as my alpha mat. Right? So now that blue is now filled into that area. So now if I were to just take this blue solid and move it, oops, the other way, you can see how it's like filling up. So I'm just moving the position now. Now if I turn this back on, and I set this to a different mode, let's say add, there we go. Now we have those two things working in conjunction. Right. But again, you want to make sure that it's not like a spastic life. You want to have some control over it. You want, you want some things to move, but you don't want everything to move. Now, someone else did have a question before about bringing in lines that you drew inside of Illustrator and then animating them. So I'm going to show that, and then that'll be the end of this lecture unless there's questions about that. So I'm just going to go into a new item here. And I'm just going to draw a line like so. Perfect. And then I will save this as line. Back here, back to artwork. Nope, that's the wrong folder. I clicked too fast. Composition, retain layer size. All right, so by default, it's bringing in my Illustrator file just like this. We can't see it, but there is a stroke on this. Just draw a shape here, make this purple, and throw it in the back. There we go. So it looks the same. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to say Create Shapes from Vector Layers. Now what this should do is it should actually build the shape layers that we could then do a trim path to and then have it trace it. So I do that, I open this up, I open up my contents, I open up my group, I open up my path, or actually I go to my fill, and I can just delete the fill, we don't need that. And then here's the path. So give it a color, give it a thickness, and then I can do that trim path on it, and then animate this. So there it is. Okay, so the only thing we did is we just right-clicked, created, and then that shapes from vector layers. And then what we can do too is you can loop this. So I can take this and loop it, and then say loop out. I drew a blank. Cycle. And then I don't need the 0 at the end of this. I believe it works without it, yeah. There we go. Oops. Let me give this a little more time. Let me squish this back. Okay, now that looks weird doing that, but let me also add in here the start. So I'm going to go to also add the start. Put this at 100. And then I'm just going to add a couple extra keyframes. Anytime you do a loop like this, you always want to make sure that they're in sync. Okay, so 0 up to 100, and that one should be 100. There we go. There we go. And then it's going to loop again. What? Oh, I didn't loop out the other one. Alt-click that, cycle this, there we go. Right, so now we're looping this same shape over and over and over again, as fast as we want, as slow as we want, whatever it is, we just squishy the keyframes. Yes, sir?
I was watching behind the scenes of a movie or whatever yesterday, and they had like this effect they was using where the person was moving his arms around. They had these like colorful, like squiggly things moving around.
Mm-hmm.